Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to my presentation. My name is Miguel Campos, and I belong to Tohoku University in Japan. My presentation is titled Residual Post-Pandemic ICT Knowledge in Foreign Language Teaching in Higher Education in Japan. For my presentation, first I will start with a very brief introduction. Then I'm going to talk about Japan and the ICT knowledge before and after the COVID-19 pandemic. Then I'm going to present my study and results. Then I'm going to advance with some analysis between teacher and students and some conclusions. So as we know, the education has been transitioning for a long time in the last century from a more teacher-centered style with lecture-based, with lower learning outcomes, individual work, into a more modern style of education with new methods, centering the learning process and students, with active participation, with higher learning outcomes. And in this transition into modern education, the technological resources also played a very important role. And it is in this point in which I want to introduce the topic in terms of ICT literacy. Nora and Snyder in 2008 described that in order to be able to include into this transition ICT resources, it is also important that teachers and students learn how to properly use these resources, and that's what it was called ICT literacy. In the case of Japan, the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sport, Science, and Technology, or MEXT, launched in 2011 a project called the Vision for ICT in Education, which included a complete renovation of the educational system to include ICT tools and devices. In the case of universities, most universities adopted the LMS style. That actually is this movement did not just happen in Japan, but around the world. However, not because the adoption of LMS occurred in Japan means that most of the users were ICT literate. And how much they are literate will affect the outcome in the learning in the curriculums at university level. Of course, when the pandemic came in 2020 and 2021, the whole educational system became online in the case of Japan. And a speedy ICT learning took place. Whoever was ICT literate had a little bit more advantage in the process, but whoever did not have much experience using this kind of resources had to come up to speed very, very quickly. And from this year, in 2022, MEXT, the Ministry of Education, asked the universities to go back to the classroom to a face-to-face methodology, if possible. And as a response to this request, 95% of the universities said that they were going to conduct at least 70% of the lessons in a face-to-face, 70% or more of this lesson in a face-to-face format. So from this situation, some questions arise. Were university and foreign language teachers and students already ICT literate before the COVID-19 pandemic? And when the pandemic happened and they had to learn the use of all these type of tools, and now that they're back to the classroom, how much or what kind of knowledge they learn, and how much of that knowledge is remain in the classrooms today? And or if coming back to the classrooms meant regressing the educational methodology transition into what it used to be before the pandemic. For that, two surveys were conducted, one for teachers and one for students. And the criteria that was measured in ICT literacy was the LMS management, video conferencing systems, document creating software, different types of files, and the use of printed versus digital or virtual materials. And this criteria was measured in 3 time periods: before the COVID-19 pandemic, during the COVID-19 pandemic, and currently. And for the results that I could find in this study, first, 73% of the teachers currently are conducting face-to-face lessons at university level. Only 9% remain online, and the rest are working in a hybrid mode, which means online and also inside of the classrooms. In terms of the use of LMS, the LMS most predominant before the COVID-19 pandemic was the university-owned, privately owned LMS platforms that the universities built or bought in this case. But because of the COVID-19 pandemic, many LMS emerged very quickly, and the one that was most used was Google Classroom. And that's the one that currently is also being most used, independently if teachers and students are back to the classrooms. In the terms of video conferencing systems, before the COVID-19 pandemic, only 9% of the teachers knew how to use video conferencing systems in the classrooms. But because of the COVID-19 pandemic, 83% use Zoom and 35% use Google Meet, which were the 2 most used platforms at the university level. Currently, only 50% of the teachers remained using Zoom, and 14% remain using Google Meet in this case. In terms of the comparison between teachers and the students, there was a big difference. Teachers were a lot more prepared, as we can see in the graphics. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, they were a lot more ICT literate. But in the case of the students, even though Japan is presented as a high technological country, which indeed it is, the knowledge of students at a high school level and in the initial years at university is very low. As we can see in the graphic, most of the students learn how to use these ICT tools during the COVID-19 pandemic, and currently they keep using them. But before that, they were not. The same thing happened if we compare the results in the use of files, different types of files inside of the classroom, in which we can see students do not know how to use this type of files. And finally, one of the most prominent results that we found is that the decrease in printed materials inside of the classroom. Before the COVID-19 pandemic, that was the most predominant resource, but because of the COVID-19 pandemic and currently as well, most of the resources now are digital, independently that students and teachers are back to the classrooms. So as conclusions of this study, we could see that teachers were a lot more ICT literate than students. And students at higher education enter with a very low knowledge of ICT resources. Students, of course, had to quickly transition into this technological way of learning because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and they had to come up to speed very quickly. They are currently still using all those resources. Most of the ICT knowledge acquired during the pandemic remains right now in the classrooms, both teachers and students, regardless if it's a face-to-face method or in a hybrid methodology. And finally, as I mentioned before, there's a significant decrease in the use of printed material in this transition, which is proof that the methodological approach in higher education is transitioning to a more technological, eco-friendly, and flexible learning paradigm, which is very promoting or is very engaging for what is coming for the education at higher education in Japan. These are my references in case you want to check further what I have presented, and that would be all for today. Thank you very much, and that's my contact in case you want to contact me for further knowledge about this study. Thank you very much.